Welcome everyone. Welcome everyone. Welcome everyone to another Ref Brandon and the Todd family YouTube video. Wherever you are, whatever you may be doing, thank you so much for making Ref Brandon and the Todd family a part of your day. We always greatly appreciate it. Hopefully everybody's having a wonderful week so far. I know that high school football for most of the people in this area kicks off Friday night. So it is officially football season. Of course, 1 week from Saturday, we have week 0 in college football, which the marquee game that day is Florida State and Georgia Tech at high noon Eastern Time from Dublin, Ireland. But today, I want to preview another college football team's schedule, and I believe I previewed this team's schedule last year. I don't exactly recall what I had their record being, but I think I was pretty close to being on par to what they actually were. But they've gone through some changes this offseason with the offensive coordinator, so we'll see whether or not it helps them. It should, definitely. But the reason why I picked this team is because the other day I was talking about Texas A&M having a chance to have a really good season because they pretty much missed, for the most part, all the big dogs in the SEC. And I was looking over this team's schedule and I thought, you know what? They missed all the big dogs in their conference. So most people have this team going 11-1 or 10-2 because of that. What do I think they'll do? Let's find out. I'm talking about the Iowa Hawkeyes. Now, the last 5 years, they have been about bottom 5, bottom 10 in the country in offense. Their offense has been putrid. They're the only team in America that can go out there and play a game and be 120th in offense and win. I don't know how Kirk Ferentz does it, but he always has. They've been bottom of the barrel for about 5 years on offense, and they still had a double-digit win season, and they've averaged about 8 wins a year with no offense at all. So if they can average 8 wins a year, especially in a day and time where football is all about offense, if their offense is decent, they should have a really good season. Kirk Ferentz always gets talked about for being boring because unless you're an old school football fan, he is boring. It's like watching paint dry, watching them play football if you're a modern day new school football fan. But if you're an old school football fan who just likes to watch somebody line up, hit you in the mouth, then you like to watch Iowa football. And Kirk Ferentz is old school. He'd be fine winning every game 10-7. He'd have no problems at all with that. But they open up the season on August 31st against Illinois State. Then on September 7th, they have their annual game with their arch rivals. They battle for the Cyhawk Trophy, that is the Iowa State Cyclones. They play Iowa State in Game 2 every single year, and I do expect Iowa State to be much improved this year. Then they play Troy on September the 14th. Then they play Minnesota on September 21st, and then they're off the final weekend of September, so 4 games, and then they have their first bye week. Then they come off their bye week October the 5th against Ohio State. And then they play Washington on October the 12th. Michigan State on October 19th. Northwestern on October 26th. Then they open up the month of November on November 2nd against Wisconsin. Then they play UCLA on Friday night, November the 8th. And then they have their second bye week. Then they round out the regular season November November 23rd against Maryland. And then, as always, they wrap it up Thanksgiving weekend, November 30th, against Nebraska. Now, outside of Ohio State, which of course obviously is their one big-time opponent, they don't play Michigan. They don't play Penn State. So they have avoided, for the most part, all the top guns in the Big Ten. They also don't play USC, which according to some people, they're going to be really good this year. But when you don't play Michigan and you don't play Penn State, you should have a pretty good season. So looking over their schedule, I think they lose to Ohio State, and I think they lose to Washington, and that would have put them at 10-2. But I'm going to go with 9-3. I think they lose to Minnesota. They shouldn't. They're a better team than Minnesota. But Iowa has a tendency every year to have one game on the schedule where you just scratch your head and say, how did they lose that game? Because their offense just doesn't show up, which their offense never shows up and hasn't for a handful of years now. But their defense is normally good enough to where they can score 14 and still win. But they always have that one game a year where they have some collapses on defense or some dumb turnovers on offense to give away points or special teams touchdowns, and they lose. And they play Minnesota right before the bye week, which heads into Ohio State. So I think they're going to be 3-0 with wins over Illinois State, Iowa State, and Troy. And then they're going to want to play Minnesota, head into the bye week, and get ready for the Buckeyes. And I think they're going to lay a complete egg. And I think Minnesota's going to beat them. And it's going to be like 14-10, 14-12, 17-13, somewhere along in there. But they did fire Brian Ferentz as their offensive coordinator. And they hired Tim Lester. And everywhere he's ever coached, his offense has been good. So I do expect Iowa's offense to be improved this year. But you're not going to go from being 125th in the country in offense to being 50th in one offseason. It's not going to happen. So I expect them to improve. They're probably going to be around 85 or 90, which for Iowa, that's a pretty good season on offense. But I think that's good enough to win the majority of your games. But 9-3 is still a really good season. And if by some chance I'm wrong and they do beat Minnesota, 10-2 is a really, really, really good season. But now it's hard to tell because Cade McNamara was their quarterback last year. He got hurt late in the season, missed the rest of the season, had surgery. He's back now. And you don't really ever see a lot of stats and numbers from scrimmages. But about a week or so ago, somebody put out some stats on Cade McNamara and said he was 4 for 20 in the scrimmage that day. And I tend to believe it only because if you never hear stats and numbers from anybody on offense or defense in a scrimmage, and now all of a sudden you hear this, that just seems kind of random. So it makes me believe that it's true. You can't really put a lot of stock into a scrimmage, but 4 for 20 is absolutely hideous. I mean, that is absolutely awful, especially in practice against your own team. That's pitiful. But Iowa is changing their offense. They are going to be more up-tempo this year under Tim Lester, and Kirk Ferentz has never ran that kind of offense in his 95 years as head coach. So it is a complete change of pace for not only Cade McNamara but the entire Iowa offense. But I still think that with them avoiding Penn State and Michigan, that they're going to have a really good season. They could even go 11-1, beating Washington. because I think Washington takes a huge step back this year, but they're still going to be decent. So, any thoughts on this? Please feel free to let me know. I've got Iowa going 3-0 out of conference, 6-3 in the conference, 9-3 overall, with the losses to Minnesota, Ohio State, and Washington. I do think Iowa State is much improved this year, but Iowa State is one of those things where Iowa State sneaks up and beats them every now and again. But Iowa could go 1-11, and their one win would be against Iowa State, and Iowa State could go 11-1, and their one loss would be Iowa. It just seems like when they play, no matter they play in Ames or play at Iowa Stadium at Kinnick, it doesn't matter. Iowa always beats them. Let's go ahead and get our dad joke of the day in here. Why did the cheese do well on its test? Because it was sharp. And that does it for today's Ref Brandon and the Todd Family YouTube video. Until next time, it's Ref Brandon saying, just like in pro wrestling, life can be over by the count of 3. Tell your friends and family how much you love them. Bye.